And we are very privileged to have two of our very ambitious CEOs with us today. Please welcome to the stage our CEO of QBio, Jeff Kaditz, and the CEO of Earli, Cyriac Roeding. Hey, guys.
How you doing?
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
All right, so I gave a little bit of a detailed overview of what you guys are building, but let's start with your personal entrepreneur stories. You guys are, in addition to building incredibly ambitious companies, you are also building in healthcare for the first time. Both of you are repeat founders, have built other companies before, but somehow decided that you wanted to build in healthcare next. Tell us about your journey and what led you guys to this particular industry. Jeff, let's start with you.
Sure. I worked in a number of industries, and I like to think I'm a recovering high-energy physicist from my academic career. But I think the thing that was most interesting to me about healthcare was that, again, as a physicist, we understand so much about the universe outside of our bodies. But when I go to a doctor and ask them some very basic things about the way my own body works or what's going on inside my body, I'm shocked at how quickly they say, well, we just don't know the answer to that. And so I also think that I can't speak for the Japanese healthcare system, but the healthcare system in the United States is so broken that it feels like, again, just the fact that people say the art of medicine to me indicates that it's broken, because I really am interested in seeing if we can make it the science of medicine. And that was kind of the motivation for me.
Mm-hmm. And you also had a personal healthcare experience as well that somewhat motivated your journey.
Yeah, I feel like everybody in the United States has a personal healthcare journey, so I'm not sure that makes me unique, unfortunately. I think that's kind of one of the tragedies of our healthcare system, is everybody knows, if they haven't personally had a terrible experience with the healthcare system, is they know somebody who has. Mm-hmm. And obviously that, to me, begs fixing.
Absolutely. So Cyriac, what about you? What was your story for coming into healthcare?
Well, every time I'm in Japan, I feel like I'm looking into the future. I actually started out in mobile. Tokyo ni sunde imashita, loku kangetsu gurai.
I was in Tokyo for 6 months, and I went to Sophia University to study management, but I need to speak English.
I saw the mobile technology here, and so I started 3 companies in mobile before. My last company was a shopping app called Shopkick, which rewards you simply for walking into a store without having to buy anything there, just walking with your smartphone. And that company was acquired by a Korean company, SK Telecom, for $250 million. And then I decided to follow my heart and not my mind in terms of what I was going to do next. And that led me to the intersection of biology, engineering, and software, because on that intersection, I think we're going to see some of the most profound changes that the world has ever seen in the next 20 to 30 years. And being part of that was just too much to pass up, so that's why I'm here.
Amazing. And is it true that you kind of cold emailed your scientific founder?
I did.
That's how you guys got connected?
I did.
Tell us about that.
Well, it took me, I wanted to get back into a job within 6 months, and it took me 1.5 years. And the reason why was because I looked at over 200 ideas. I stumbled around the Stanford campus. I happened to live in a small town called Portola Valley, which is like 5 miles away. So I stumbled around the campus. I met all these wonderful scientists, and every single one told me they were working on the world's most important idea. Mm-hmm. And I knew by definition 99 out of 100 were wrong. I just didn't know who. And because I'm not a scientist. So that was very frustrating. And then I received a magazine, a print magazine. Mm-hmm. And that print magazine came to my house because I lived in somebody else's house at the time. It wasn't mine. It was from Stanford Medical School, a story about a person named Sam Gambier, who was one of the world's most preeminent early cancer detection experts, one of the top 1 or 2 people in the world. And it was a story about how he lost his only child to brain cancer at age 16, while he was searching for a way to detect cancer earlier. By the way, his son was helping him in the lab doing that at age 15. Mm-hmm. And I was shaken by the story. I remember sitting there reading it on a Thanksgiving day in 2016. And I decided on the spot to email him. And I sent him a note that day, and I said, I can only imagine how hard this day is for you on this holiday. But I read your story, and I was shaken by it. But I was also very inspired by the work you're doing. And I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm looking to build my next thing. I'd like to meet you. It took 3 months to get a meeting with him. And then we met on a Saturday morning in Portola Valley for 3 hours at a restaurant. It turns out he also lived in Portola Valley, which is only 4,000 people, and I had no idea it was my neighbor. And we talked for a long time, and he asked me the question, to your point about us being new to bio. I asked him the question whether somebody with my background, or better, lack thereof, should bother the world of biology with my presence. And he said, he looked at me and he said, I have 2 answers for you. The first one is, we need more people like you rather than fewer people like you, because we have a lot of experts but very few generalists, and even fewer people who know how to build a startup company. And the second answer is, biology will always find a way to screw you over. It will take longer than you want, and it will be harder than you want. Are you ready for that?
Very nice, and here we are today. Earlier, my partner David mentioned that the American dynamism companies have a very different profile to them. When you think about it from an investment perspective as venture capitalists, they are often not just software, but they have a hardware component or some physical component to it. And you two both also have companies that are kind of hybrid businesses. You have a software component for sure, but you also have some kind of physical, biological component to the business model, which requires more capital to build. When you first started your companies, was it a foregone conclusion that you would raise venture capital? And what did you think about as far as the characteristics of the venture firms that you pursued when you first raised capital?
It definitely wasn't a foregone conclusion. This company started actually as in some ways as a physics experiment that I was funding myself after my last company had gone public. And I didn't think we were ready for venture capital funding because we had to prove some things out that experts told us were impossible. And I felt like once we'd proved those out, then it would make sense to approach institutional investors. But I actually was approached by institutional investors while we were still working on this concept in a lab, and they said, we'd like to help accelerate this and invest. And so it ended up being Andreessen Horowitz, who also had invested in my last company. And so we had a track record, and it seemed like a good partnership.
Amazing. How about you, Cyriac?
I like to work on things that look weird, that from the outside often don't fit into a certain bucket. And the reason is because I believe that on the intersection of worlds that usually don't talk, that's where we will always see some of the most profound innovations. And by definition, they don't fit into a certain cluster, which also means that they don't always fit into the cluster of the normal financing world. So if you look at traditional healthcare investors, they look typically at a drug pipeline. They basically ask you, which stage are you in? Small molecule, you go through this phase, that phase, that phase, that phase, and then you can assess the risk profile. That's not how Earli works, because Earli uses a technology, a genetic technology for diagnostics. This has never been done. So how are you going to set up milestones that everybody knows? So the idea came out of Stanford, and it had already been developed as a concept and then tested in a small number of mice at the Stanford lab of Sam Gambier. But I was very sure that we're going to need venture capital, because this is going to take time to develop into a marketable product. It's going to have to go through a very thorough testing, engineering work, iteration work, and you want to have people with you who know how to iterate, especially parallel iterate, not serial, which is one of the reasons for slowness in bio, is that a lot of experiments run serially. If you parallelize things, you got to have a lot of balls in the air that all have to come together at the same time. So my first call was to Mark Benioff, who is the founder of Salesforce, and I knew that he liked unusual ideas in healthcare, and actually he did like it. And then my next call was to Mark Andreessen, who was someone I had always admired, and I had always wanted to work with him. And I knew that he had the bio fund. So I met Mark and I met Vijay Pandey, who had, I think they were 1.5 years into the fund. It was quite new. And when we talked about their fund, I basically heard exactly what I was thinking about, which is the intersection of computer science meets the wet lab, the dry lab meets the wet lab, and the combination of computer science and engineering and and biology. So I thought that was a very good fit. And I felt from the beginning that there were not many players out there who understood that so well.
Mm-hmm. So firms that have interdisciplinary expertise and guys named Mark is basically your formula. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go into the companies that you guys are building. So Jeff, tell us more about the vision behind QBio. And I think one thing that's great about QBio is that it's already being used in the wild. And so I know many people who have gone through their QBio exams. Tell us, what are some of the things that people are finding, and how has this impacted the lives of patients that you're serving today?
Sure. So the goal of QBio was pretty much, I mean, everybody I'm sure has seen Star Trek, is to, can you build Star Trek medbay? And so what would that mean? Well, we wanted to see if we could build a device that could measure everything about your body, genetically, biochemistry, and include a whole body scan non-invasively, and then use AI to determine and tell you whether or not you even need to go see a doctor. And so our vision really is to replace the physical exam where you have to go see a doctor, to go someplace more like a car wash for your body, where you go and in 20 minutes, everything is measured once a year. And then if you need to go see a doctor, we'll even tell you what kind of doctor you would need to see depending on the issues we detect. And this has been deployed now for the last 3 or 4 years under a clinical trial in California. And it's allowed clinicians to expand their practices by a factor of about 10. They can care for a lot more people because we can automatically prioritize the people that are higher risk for them. And so, you know, the goal really was, again, this is more on the diagnostic side than the therapeutic side to start with, but I don't see any reason why with some of the technology in the pipeline that eventually you won't be able to go into one of our scanners and not only be diagnosed, but also cured at the same time.
Amazing. And Cyriac, you kind of have a similar theme to your company where you have a diagnostic application, but potentially therapeutic applications in the future. Can you tell us more about Earli and what the vision is there and some of the key milestones that you've achieved so far?
Yeah, the story actually began with Sam trying to solve a problem that he saw every day in the Stanford clinic with patients. And we all know about liquid biopsies probably, where you take a blood sample and you look for traces of cancer in the blood, which is super exciting and very interesting. But it doesn't solve one really, really big problem in the clinic, which is detecting it does not mean diagnosing it clearly. There is a huge difference between detection of cancer and diagnosis of cancer. Let me give you an example. In lung cancer, 94% of all lesions in the lung that people see in an image are actually benign. Mm-hmm. They're not cancer. Only 6% are malignant. The problem is nobody knows which 6%. And so the standard of care, literally, is to send people home and ask them to come back 12 months later. It's called watchful waiting. There's nothing watchful except you're waiting. Mm-hmm. So during this time, your tumor may not just grow in size. It may actually turn out to start spreading tiny micrometastases elsewhere in your body, which later on, after your tumor has already been removed, cause the cancer to come back. And now your chances of survival go from over 80% down to under 10. That means every single day counts. So how can you re-engineer the body and no longer, what if we didn't have to search for cancer anymore altogether? What if we could force the cancer to reveal itself and ultimately even kill itself? Because if you can force the cancer to turn into a factory using a genetic construct that's injected and sort of re-engineer cancer cells in a way that they are genetically forced to produce a synthetic marker that doesn't belong in a human body, well, you could actually use the same approach and mechanism to force the same cell to produce its own toxin and kill itself. So there is a potential opportunity to not only discover it and clearly diagnose it and say, this is cancer and this is not cancer, which then leads to surgery, but even potentially get rid of the surgery and actually have the cancer kill itself.
That's incredible. A big theme of today's conversations has been AI and what the promise of AI can be in various industries. And we heard earlier from Ben that obviously bio and health is one of the areas that has the most promise for the application of AI. Can you guys tell us a little bit about how you're leveraging AI in your platforms, and also maybe an example of something that you feel would not have been possible without the advancements that have been made recently in AI?
Sure. Well, our thesis has always been, for the last 10 years, as we look at the power, just computing power in general, and the size of neural networks that are capable with increasingly large GPU memories, is the limitation for what is possible with AI will be based on the quality of the information you can feed into it. The models themselves will be a commodity. It will not be differentiated very much. It will be kind of the information you can train them with the model. So we've focused from the very beginning on how to measure as much as possible, as cheaply as possible, about the human body in a quantitative way. So what we're able to do is now, in a few minutes, we can gather billions of data points about your body. And AI allows us to correlate between these things very quickly. And you can imagine how long it would take a human doctor to correlate between a billion data points that were gathered in a single physical exam. So really what it's doing is allowing us to explore scenarios where, the way I think about it is the reason AI will inevitably extend our own consciousness is because the volume of sensory inputs you can give in AI and the variety is so much larger. We are limited by a small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. We can detect some mechanical vibrations in that sound. So we have very limited sensory inputs. We can give AI a much, much wider information about the world around us. So we'll inevitably be able to model and understand the world better. And so really what we've focused on is how do we expand effectively the consciousness of these models so that they can detect things that no human would ever be able to, because we simply are not wired to explore this sensory input.
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. Cyriac?
Yeah, if you think about AI, it has two major functions for us. One is when you go to the doctor and you get your image taken and we're lighting up malignant nodules and not benign ones, well, you can use the power of AI to make that image even more clear, whether it's malignant or benign, by having an AI booster on top of it that reads images better. So that's the obvious one. But there is a different step that is also really interesting, which is in the actual development of the whole product. As I mentioned before, we're using a genetic construct to identify whether something is cancer or not. That means it goes into the cancer cell, and it now needs to interrogate millions and millions of dysregulations that can cause cancer, because cancer is essentially a dysfunction of your own cell. It's a cell that has gone haywire. Now, there are many ways it could go haywire. Therefore, you have to interrogate millions of possibilities, and then you also have to think about millions of possibilities how to address that. Mm-hmm. So now you multiply that with each other, and you can see the universe. With the help of AI, we were able to quickly drill down and identify what the most important factors were that actually are decisive when you have a non-small cell lung cancer, to cover multiple pathways that can cause the disease, but not have too many different constructs, because if there are too many, they're too big. We can't get them into the cell anymore. So there's a very fine balance that we needed to strike. And with that, we were able to do this so quickly that we've already brought it all the way to large animals, and now we can move to humans very soon. That would be impossible. We would probably still be at the earliest mouse stages without AI.
Incredible. Amazing. Last question here. I think both of you, since I've had the privilege of knowing you guys from sort of almost the beginnings of your companies, both of you have had a vision that is global in nature. I think both of you have aspirations to ultimately have your products in the hands of patients around the world. What do you see as the biggest attractiveness factor of the ex-US market, both in terms of the systems itself, the healthcare system itself, as well as regulation? I know both of your companies are subject to the various regulation regimes within the US and also globally. How do you think about bringing your products to market in those regimes?
That's a great question. I think I'm actually more excited about expanding internationally than domestically, simply because I think in general in the United States, the fundamental problem in preventive healthcare is, from an underwriting perspective, is how do I spend $1 today to save 5 tomorrow, right? And in the United States, the fact that the payers and the providers are not incentivized to be aligned means that if your insurance policy pays out $1 to take care of you this year, the only way that they can save money next year is to spend less this year, right? They have no incentive to actually spend money to reduce your cost of care in the future. But internationally, there's a lot more forward-thinking countries that have very different incentives, where I think a system like ours that is truly preventative is aligned with the kind of economic incentives of the system. So I think the places where those incentives are aligned are in some ways a better fit for us and preventative care, because preventative care is difficult in the United States specifically because there is no financial incentive to be preventative.
Mm-hmm.
I said in the beginning, I always feel like I'm looking to the future when I'm in Japan. Mm-hmm. Japan has a 38% rate of stage 1 detected lung cancers. That may not sound like where Japan wants to be, but it is more than twice as good as the United States. Wow. In other words, earlier detection. Why? Because Japan has made a tremendous effort over the last 20 years to reduce smoking and to increase scanning of the thorax in order to see if there is potentially any nodule in the lung. So I can see an immediate fit to turn that detection into an earlier diagnosis, where you not only see it, but you actually know whether it is malignant or not and can act faster. So I think Japan is probably the world champion at early lung cancer detection, and that's probably also true for other cancers we're working on, like liver. So this is the place, I think, given the healthcare system that Jeff just mentioned, this is a national healthcare system, you actually have an incentive to keep people from getting sick later. And I think this could be a tremendous opportunity to bring a technology early to a market where the system is set up for it.
Amazing. Well, thank you both for sharing your inspiring stories and for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.